Well, hello everybody and welcome. This is Lizzie and Justin, and we are here again. Another week of Turning Towards Life. Welcome, Lizzie. It's really good to see you and be with you. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We know you are all over the world and on lots of different ways of being with us on YouTube, on our Turning Towards Life website. Some of you join us in our Facebook group, which you're really welcome to join. Lots of you are podcasting. And we frankly have no idea when you're listening to this. It could be the beginning of November 2024, which is when Lizzie, you and I are having this conversation, but it could be years into the future. And whenever that is, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us some of your attention and time. Thank you for taking part in this conversation. We're going to do what we always do in a moment. And Lizzie, you've brought us a wonderful source for us to begin with, like a wellspring for this conversation. But I wanted to say to everyone before we begin, if you want to engage with us in other ways, come into our Facebook group, just search for Turning Towards Life, or head over to our website. You can support us there, or leave us a review on a podcast place or on YouTube, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of those things really help in having this conversation be out in the world with people who would benefit from it. So I think enough from me. Lizzie, over to you.
Thank you, Justin. Welcome, everyone. And we have a source this week by the wonderful Pema Chodron from the book Start Where You Are, which in my life anyway has been a kind of basic text for a really long time. And when I say basic, I mean from the very beginning of any kind of opening I felt, brackets, didn't know what to do with myself, felt hurt in all kinds of ways, wasn't living really the life that I wanted to live, and had to find that and all those things. Since really back then, this has been a place to come back to, and it's one of the books that keeps on giving. And also each of the chapters is very standalone-ish, which I really enjoy. So I happened to flick it open again the other day, and this passage sprung out at me and hit me in a very different way, because I guess I'm a different person than when I read it last time. You know, it's one of those things that things happen differently in me when I am different than I was last time I read it. So I felt really inspired and grateful for this writing, grateful for Pema Chodron and her long-standing brilliance. So here we go. Here's a few paragraphs from this wonderful book. There is a life-affirming teaching in Buddhism, which is that Buddha, which means awake, is not someone you worship. Buddha is not someone you aspire to. Buddha is not somebody that was born more than 2,000 years ago and was smarter than you'll ever be. Buddha is our inherent nature, our Buddha nature. And what that means is that if you're going to grow up fully, the way that it happens is that you begin to connect with the intelligence that you already have. It's not like some intelligence that's going to be transplanted into you. If you're going to be fully mature, you will no longer be imprisoned in the childhood feeling that you always need to protect yourself or shield yourself because things are too harsh. If you're going to be a grown-up, which I would define as being completely at home in your world, no matter how difficult the situation, is because you will allow something that's already in you to be nurtured. You allow it to grow, you allow it to come out, instead of all the time shielding it and protecting it and keeping it buried.
Thank you, Lizzie. I'm going to read this again with a reminder that you can always find these sources in the notes that come out with the podcast episodes, and also at turningtowards.life, and also in our Facebook group. So this is by Pema Chodron. There's a life-affirming teaching in Buddhism, which is that Buddha, which means awake, is not someone you worship. Buddha is not someone you aspire to. Buddha is not somebody that was born more than 2,000 years ago and was smarter than you'll ever be. Buddha is our inherent nature, our Buddha nature. And what that means is that if you're going to grow up fully, the way that it happens is that you begin to connect with the intelligence that you already have. It's not like some intelligence that's going to be transplanted into you. If you're going to be fully mature, you will no longer need to be imprisoned in the childhood feeling that you always need to protect yourself or shield yourself because things are too harsh. If you're going to be a grown-up, which I would define as being completely at home in your world, no matter how difficult the situation, it's because you will allow something that's already in you to be nurtured. You allow it to grow. You allow it to come out instead of all the time shielding it and protecting it and keeping it buried.
Thank you, Justin. So I think the piece of this that really got me is this line: you will allow something that's already in you to be nurtured. And as I'm feeling into it now, I think it's such a brilliant question to be living in. What is it to nurture that which is already in me and that which is awake? As Pema puts it at the beginning of this passage, that which is awake can be nurtured, and I and my life can nurture that. And that's what it means to be grown up, as she's putting it, at home in my world, no matter what's happening. Which is a very different story than I have many times held about myself. Like, oh, I have to fix lots of things about me before I am okay, or I need to heal lots of things, or and of course healing is wonderful, but there are all these different kinds of routes to healing. And this route feels very, very compelling to me, which is to nurture this givenness, this inherent nature, nurture my relationship with that as a path and see what that brings. And I feel like this last line as well, you allow it to grow and you allow it to come out instead of shielding it and protecting it. I feel for some reason that really moves me, that there's a way that each of us can allow this inherent nature to be free in the world, that's possible. And I know the feeling so well of kind of hiding and shielding and thinking, oh my gosh, one day I wonder what it would be if I just sang, or I wonder if it would be if I expressed myself in this particular way that feels like I could do it on my own in my bedroom, but not in the world, kind of thing. And I really love this feeling of nurturing that which is, and that we know what it is, and that we shield and that we protect and all that stuff. And yet, instead of focusing too hard on all the protection and the shielding and that all of those shenanigans, what if the path could be nurturing this inner intelligence, this being, this inherent nature, and let that be the path, which feels much less kind of like hard work to me. It feels like it has joy in it and acceptance of myself and my inner life force or something, rather than I've got to work on myself or I've got to change something. It's kind of, nurturing is really different. Nurturing something that exists already feels so much, there feels like there's so much possibility in it to me, which is very different than, oh my God, I've got all this stuff to work on and then everything will be fine.
Yeah. It is a brilliant invitation, this, and I think it's true, Lizzie, and I'll probably circle back to this. I want to acknowledge that it's at once way more possible than the alternatives, but still pretty hard. I was thinking about the alternatives whilst you were speaking, because the the alternative is that in order to be able to be in the world as an adult, and this is such a good phrase, it's really fierce, and I think necessary fierce, that being an adult is being able to be completely at home in your world, no matter how difficult, no matter how. There's this line here about so we don't protect ourselves or shield ourselves because things are too harsh. One way in order to do that would be, as Pema Chodron is saying, would be to look at someone else and imagine I have to be like them. And that's the one that I think is an impossible task. You know, we look at Buddha, or I look at you, Lizzie, or, you know, whoever it is, people I admire. And I set the standard of my adulthood as somehow getting into me what I see in you. And I don't think that can possibly be possible to do, because I am this one. So hard to find the right language for this. Going to come at this another way. So first of all, I think that's the impossible task. But second of all, to come at the truth of this, that we all have, by virtue of being living beings, we have what we need to face the world. We have what we need to be in this world, which, it's really important to say, doesn't mean we have what we need to succeed in conventional ways. It doesn't mean that we'll get famous or be free of suffering or live in the house we want or marry the person we want, if that's what we want to do, or it doesn't mean any of those things. I can see that Pema's not talking about that. We have what we need inherent in us to meet life. And the reason I think that that's true is because we are life. We're not separate from it. You and I have spent, because we've been, as we record this, Lizzie, we're in the middle of working with a really wonderful group of people teaching and exploring exactly this question together. It's very, very present for me that, of course, when we come into the world as babies, we're not yet adults, so we don't yet have the adult capacities of cognition and language and movement and manual dexterity and relationship skill and all of that. So there is a process where we accumulate that. But as adults, what we find is that we've also, as we've grown, we've put an enormous amount of effort into walling off parts of ourselves that we felt were not welcome in the world, and may well not have been welcome in the world when we were young and didn't have the capacity. And it strikes me that to be completely at home in the world, in other words, to do what Pema invites us to do, which is to allow it all to come out so we can meet the world. Here's where the difficult work is. It involves us finding all the places where we've made inner protections, where we've walled off parts of ourselves that we imagined couldn't be brought, and finding a way to soften and release and get permission inside us to bring the intelligence that's there that we've been holding back. And for some of us, that's our creativity, and for some of us, that's our truthfulness, and some of us, it's our capacity to dance, and for some of us, it's finding the wisdom in joy, and for some of us, it's gratitude, and for some of us, it's fierce determination, and for some of us, it's the wisdom to rest, and for some of us, it's the wisdom to move. And that on the one hand, it's a perfectly natural thing to do, as Pema's inviting us to find our way back to those inherent sources of life in ourselves, and at the same time, it's big work, because we've necessarily, as we grew into adulthood, spent a lot of effort constructing in us, or having in us, structures and parts of us and patterns that keep the things that we thought weren't welcome away. So isn't it a different way to think about how to learn to live in the world, to practice the arts of welcome in ourselves, to practice the arts of dissolving the fortresses and the buttresses and the walls we've made in ourselves, so that we find more and more that the intelligence that's needed so we can be at home in the world, no matter how things are, no matter how hard they are, is right there within reach.
Yeah, and I'm musing on the interplay between the protective parts, the walls and the buttresses that you're saying, and this inherent nature thing. Because the more I am able to nurture this inherent nature, the more of a home, the more of a welcome is possible to the parts that. So it's like a backwards and forwards thing. Like, I could come at it from the protections. I could wonder what all of the things are in the way of that inherent nature. And I could also accept my inherent nature and nurture it and see how that then feels to be with those protections and those walls that I've built. And I don't know what way round that is. I think I know that a combination of it really works. Like, as in, when I'm feeling all kinds of things, sometimes it doesn't feel possible at all to wonder about my awakeness and my capacity to nurture this inherent nature of mine. And so at that moment, it really matters to nurture the protections and the walls and the defenses that I have, to really pay attention to them and give myself to that. And then sometimes, maybe in the down moments where that's not happening, which happen enough in my life that they are a source of curiosity and wondering. Like when I'm walking along the street and I'm on my way to the supermarket and nothing particularly is worrying me. Like that for example, happens. Like I've got a pavement to hold me and a route to follow, and it's simple, and I'm just doing a simple task. In those moments that are kind of innocuous, you know what I mean? There's not really anything significant going on other than me walking to the shops to get some milk or something. In those moments, I feel like I'm not having to deal with my protections and my walls and probably maybe it's when I'm on my own and things aren't complex for a little while. In those moments, I feel like it's really possible to nurture this nature, this being, this life erupting through this body. I can, what's the word? I can intentionally wonder about it and see what it's like to be this one in that way. And I feel like as I do that faithfully, when then it's needed to be right next to a protection or a wall or something that's in my system, my constellation of parts that make me, that have come from my history and goodness knows where else in my ancestry and everything. When those are present, I have something to call on that I've been making relationship with and acquainting myself with. And it might be the trees that I saw along the way, or the little flowers in the little area beneath all the trees on the pavements outside where I live, or watching parents and their children on their scooters on their way to the local school, or whatever ordinariness has kind of filled me up, seems to be supportive in the sometimes challenging and usually liberating inner work of knowing my defenses and my reactivity and the stuff that gets in the way of freedom and open communication and joy and fulfillment and integrity.
You're talking, Lizzie, about when such a useful way of talking, to wonder about when it's time to attend to being in contact with our sense of absolute enoughness and capacity in the world, and when it's time to soften the defensiveness in us so that the more exiled parts of us can come home at different things at different times. It's really touching for me, because I think that I've tended to more orient towards the like the work I have to do. I think it's easy for me to go, well, I've got to work with all of these protections in me, and I've got to find the things in me that have not yet had a home, like my wildness, or I'll take wildness, for example. And you propose the possibility that as the not even the possibility, the how necessary it is to come from the other side too, like to come from both sides too, which is, I already have everything I need. It's right here. And I've been thinking about that actually a lot. What you said reminded me of the perils of a victim narrative that we can have. And I'm not saying there aren't victims of real terrible things that happen, and any of us can be victims to that, and some of us are more or less, because of our background or color of our skin or our gender or any of those things. I want to acknowledge all of that. What I notice in me is it has been quite easy for me to take up a narrative of, I'm too small to meet this world. I'm too vulnerable. I'm too tiny. I'm too hurt. I'm too confused. I'm too inadequate. More recently, I've been practicing taking up a different stance, much more taking for granted what Pema Chodron already says. Okay, I'm an adult. I'm grown up. There's an enormous amount of intelligence already here. My life may be in some ways exactly as I want it, but in other ways very, very different from how I want it. And I have everything I need to be in the midst of that, as long as I don't base my okayness on my life being the way I want. So if I equate myself with the actual conditions of my life, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole of always feeling like I'm not enough or it's not enough. But Pema says to us, our Buddha nature is inherent. It's already here. You don't have to go over the sea or over the mountains to reach for it. It's right here, like in our mouths and in our hearts and in our bodies. So I think there is something very, very important to be said for carrying ourselves through life with as much dignity as we can, as much uprightness and as much sense of our own solidity as we can, and taking it for granted that this is already true as a way of growing into it, as well as, so this is like pecking from the inside. I'm thinking about a chick coming out of an egg, pecking from the inside as well as pecking from the outside. And pecking from the outside might be undoing all of the barriers and things, and then pecking from the inside is, here I am. I'm already unfolding into the world. That's been a startling revelation for me really quite recently in my life, that I can simply declare that stand. And then I once remember having a conversation, Lizzie, with Jet Saris, who you and I know as the author of the wonderful book Undefended Love. And she talked to me about finding a way to live in the world where there was no safety and also no harm. In other words, we start to dissolve the distinction between safety and harm, and much more, here I am in the world. I'll bring the best of me. Everything that I can, I'll bring. And I'll stop judging the world as sufficient or insufficient, or me as sufficient and insufficient. I will bring my compassion and my courage and my love and my wisdom as fully as I can. I find that increasingly enormously inviting and permission giving, particularly as I've spent so much of my life on the other side, judging myself as way too small and having already done something irredeemably wrong that I can never make up for, all of that kind of stuff. Sometimes I need to simply set it aside, which I don't mean to make sound trivial. And I think it's also, for me, got a lot to do with how I bodily inhabit myself. If I let myself feel myself to the full extent of my own body and beyond, if I hold my body with as much dignity as I can find, not in a forced way, if I keep my eyes open and I keep my heart soft so I'm available to the world, it's like I can feel my skin much more. And then I'm here ready to do much more what Pema says. And yes, I have to do all of the dissolving, the protections and working with the exile part. Yeah, I have to do that too. I'm grateful to be finding that this is part of it. It's a necessary part. It's also quite a joyful part to take up.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's possibly why this leapt out at me, is I could feel the joy in it. I could feel the appreciation for the joyful way of being that's possible in the world. And that it feels to me like to be imbued with inherent Buddha nature, awakeness, is not separate from joy. So I'm really glad that you used that word joy. And I love this image of the bird pecking from the inside, and then whoever the mummy or the daddy bird, I don't know how that works, pecking from the outside so that the shell breaking is easier and then life can have its way. There are different things to be done and different people to do them. And, all the ways that the world kind of gets at me, I could see as the mummy bird and the daddy bird pecking on the other side. And I can do my pecking, but they can all be a path. It can all be a path to life living itself. And I love that. I love that feeling that there's different routes. We don't all have to take the same route, and we can gently, if you think how gently a little chick pecks, it's really gently. A gentle little beak pecking at the very thin shell that's even hard to peck at when you're that small. And there are different ways to come at everything. And so to include a joyful way of coming at life, as well as a thoughtful way and a deep way and a introspective way and a, what's the other word, the opposite of that, like looking out into the world and seeing what's there and using that as my path too, all these different ways. And that we could include a way of joy, a way of inner freedom of expression, and let that be our teacher too. Let that be a source of grown-upness, and let that then be supportive of whatever reactivity in me there is, whatever things there are to look at that feel difficult, that could also come as help, as support when things feel dark and difficult. There's also that. And if I've nurtured that, if I've spent time acknowledging that and nurturing it and entertaining that as the truth for some time, I wonder what gift that can be when it's really dark. And maybe other people have spent time nurturing that, and they can come along and give me a hand when it's really dark. And that might tether me to the light in a way that I couldn't do for myself or something. So I'm really, really glad that we're wondering about joy and what even it is, and how that feels like it's being transmitted from Pema Chodron's work and this passage about inherent nature. And I think it's maybe particularly meaningful to me at the moment because I have young children, and inherent in them is this joy, this freedom of expression, of being who they are, untempered and adjusted to the environment yet, and that has to be who all of us are too. And that kind of joy is available because we are beings, human beings. Feels really important to include in all the conversation that we have. So I'm really grateful for that.
Mm.
I'm looking at our time, Justin, and realizing that we are at our agreed time to end. And I want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for being in the conversation with us. Thank you for, I feel like, Justin, people are alongside us in the wrangle of finding the language and on the edge with us, kind of thing, of the unscriptedness and the seeing what it's like to try and say the thing that we feel and using language. And hopefully it inspires others to kind of have a go and talk about their lives with one another in the same way. We wanted to say, Justin, as well, that we found out this week that there is a monthly gathering in Shanghai where they gather and talk about, or I don't know exactly what happens, Justin, but in my mind there's a beautiful gathering of humans that in some way have listened to Turning Towards Life or listened to it together and then be in conversation with one another. And I think that's the most excellent thing, that there are people gathering around us in that way that until we don't know anything about, and how wonderful that occasionally we get to know about those things. So we wanted to say hello to whoever the wonderful ones are in Shanghai listening to us and gathering and being in conversation in relationship to Turning Towards Life. Thank you. We're really grateful. And we wish you a wonderful gathering if maybe this is a time that you're gathering or that you've listened to this before or after your gathering or whatever. So thank you. And thank you, Justin, for always coming and being open and wondering in all of this with me.
You're so welcome, Lizzie. I just had a thought by way of closing. I want to say hello to the Shanghai crew as well. So nice to meet you. You can all, this really is, Lizzie, a conversation between you and I, but it is, we know, a conversation with many others. And if you want to be in direct conversation with us, come into the Facebook group or email us. hello@turningtowards.life will always find us. Wouldn't it be wonderful, Lizzie, to know what people are doing with these conversations when they land in their worlds? It would be wonderful to know. And it would be very meaningful for us, I think, also to be able to do what you've just done, which is to shout out back to you if you are in contact and say hello this way and have a feel of the conversational contactful nature. This is so different to a mass, market podcast that goes out like a radio program or something. It's intended to be intimate and real and connecting with all of you who are alongside with us. We really feel it. So please feel very, very encouraged to write our way, that people sometimes do. And thanks, group in Shanghai, for doing what you're doing. We should end, indeed. We'll see you next time, everyone, next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.